Ottawa, February. The kind of cold that seeps through walls and memories. Snow fell in slow motion beneath a flickering streetlight, painting the quiet suburb in pale silver. A woman in a worn-out parka stood outside St. Patrick's Church, clutching a grocery bag that held more bills than food. Her name was Elena Martinez, a 34-year-old single mother of two. Her rent was late. Her car had stopped working that morning, and just hours before, she'd lost her job at the diner. Inside the empty church, only the candles burned, each tiny flame reflecting off a statue of the Virgin Mary, her hands open, her gaze gentle, yet sorrowful. Elena sank to her knees. She wasn't sure why she came. She hadn't prayed in years, but that night, desperation was heavier than pride. "I don't even know if you're real," she whispered. "But if you can hear me, please help me take care of my children." A drop of melted wax rolled down the side of the nearest candle, tracing a bright line like a tear. At that exact moment, the old church clock struck 9 p.m., and for the briefest instant, the air seemed to shimmer with warmth. Elena opened her eyes. She felt lighter somehow. Not saved, not yet, but seen. No one else was there to witness it. Yet that small, quiet prayer would become the beginning of something impossible to explain, because 2 days later, a complete stranger would walk into her life and change everything. Elena had come to Canada 12 years earlier from Colombia, chasing a promise of stability that never quite materialized. She worked double shifts, cleaned houses, waited tables, whatever kept food on the table for her kids, Liam and Sophia. Her apartment on Bronson Avenue was small but tidy, walls covered with the children's drawings and the faint smell of instant coffee. The neighbors knew her as quiet, polite, always in a hurry. She rarely talked about the father of her children. He had left when Sophia was still a baby, promising to send something once he got settled in Alberta. Years passed, nothing came. Still, Elena refused to complain. "At least we have each other," she'd tell the kids, forcing a smile as she packed their lunches at 5 a.m. But beneath that calm rhythm, exhaustion was eroding her faith. Every bill felt like a verdict, every call from the landlord, a reminder that her life could unravel with one missed paycheck. On the Sunday before everything changed, the heating broke down. The apartment's windows were fogged with frost, and Liam developed a cough that wouldn't stop. She spent the night wrapped in blankets beside him, scrolling through job listings she couldn't qualify for. The next morning, when her manager at the diner told her business was slow and they had to let her go for now, she simply nodded. No anger left, just silence. By the time she walked home through the falling snow, something in her spirit felt numb. She passed the church on her street corner countless times before without ever going in. But that night, with her children asleep and her hands trembling from cold, she stopped. The lights inside St. Patrick's glowed faintly through the frosted glass. She pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped into warmth, candlelight, and stillness. She didn't know it then, but that single decision to enter, to pray, to ask, would draw the attention of someone she had never met, a man who claimed he was just passing through Ottawa for work, yet somehow already knew her name. For most people, Ottawa's winter meant hot chocolate, fireplaces, and warm scarves. For Elena, it meant survival mode. Every morning began the same, the alarm at 5:15 a.m., coffee reheated from yesterday, a whisper of prayer she barely believed in anymore. She would walk Liam and Sophia to the school bus stop, pretending not to notice their thin jackets or the soles coming loose on Liam's sneakers. Her neighbor, Mrs. O'Reilly, an elderly widow who lived downstairs, sometimes left a bag of apples or milk by her door. Elena would knock to thank her, but the woman always said, "Don't mention it, dear. Maybe one day you'll do the same for someone else." Still, charity made her uneasy. She'd always believed in earning what she had. Yet the harder she worked, the less she seemed to move forward. When the car broke down, she took 2 buses to the diner. When the diner closed, she cleaned offices at night. The cycle was endless: bills, debt, exhaustion. And somewhere along the way, she had stopped looking up at the sky. She used to be joyful once. Her mother in Bogota would send her photos of processions for the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, and Elena would decorate their small living room altar with candles. But over time, the candles disappeared, and the statue of the Virgin Mary was placed in a cardboard box under her bed, out of sight, out of reach. Now each evening was a battle between fear and fatigue. She'd make soup from leftovers, help Liam with his math homework, brush Sophia's hair, and then sit alone at the kitchen table staring at her unpaid bills. The walls felt smaller each night. One Tuesday, as she counted her last $20 bill, Sophia walked in holding a drawing. It showed 3 figures under a bright blue sky: herself, Liam, and a woman in white robes holding their hands. "Who's that?" Elena asked softly. "The lady who watches us," the little girl replied. "I see her sometimes when you cry." Elena froze. She wanted to ask more, but Sophia had already skipped away, humming to herself. That night Elena lay awake, replaying those words over and over. The lady who watches us. She hadn't told anyone about her visit to the church, not even her children, but from that night on she began to feel something different around her home, a sense of calm in the middle of chaos. She didn't yet understand that grace was already moving quietly through her life, and that soon a man she had never met would walk through the same church doors, carrying an envelope that had her name on it. By early March the snow began to melt, but Elena's hope did not. The streets of Ottawa were lined with slush and the gray remnants of winter, and in that same dullness her days blurred into one another, job applications unanswered, bank calls piling up, and her son's cough returning just as her power bill doubled. She'd stopped answering the phone. Even kind words from Mrs. O'Reilly began to sting, because kindness now felt like pity. One night, after putting the children to bed, Elena sat in the kitchen with the lights off. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock and the wind outside. She opened her worn leather wallet. Inside were 2 bus tickets, a grocery receipt, and $3.75. That was all. "Is this what you wanted, God?" she whispered bitterly. "Is this what faith gets me?" Her words fell into silence. Somewhere deep inside, she wanted to believe that prayer mattered, that her visit to the church had not been pointless. But the more she looked at her reality, the more foolish that hope seemed. At midnight, a message arrived on her phone from her landlord. "Rent overdue again. I'll have to give the unit to someone else next month if this continues." The tears came without permission. She pressed her face into her hands, trying not to wake the children. For a moment she thought of calling her ex, or even her mother in Colombia, but shame stopped her. That night, she felt utterly abandoned. It was then, in the quiet between sobs, that a small click broke the silence. The hallway light flickered on by itself. She froze, staring. Then, as if guided by instinct, she walked toward the box under her bed, the one she hadn't opened in years. Inside lay the little statue of the Virgin Mary her mother had given her on the day she left Bogota. A faint chip on the hand, a soft scent of candle wax still clinging to it. Elena placed the statue on her kitchen table. She didn't say a word, just sat there, staring, until dawn. By morning, something in her had shifted. She wasn't sure what to call it: peace, surrender, exhaustion. But for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid. The next day she decided to return to the same church on Bronson Avenue. She didn't know that someone else would be there waiting. And he carried not only an envelope, but a message that would turn her life upside down. It was Sunday morning. The air outside still carried the bite of winter, but inside St. Patrick's Church, shafts of light poured through the stained glass windows, scattering colors across the floor like fragments of heaven. Elena entered quietly, her old coat still damp from melting snow. She hadn't planned to come, she simply found her feet taking her there. A few worshippers prayed in silence. The organist rehearsed softly in the distance. And there she was again, the statue of the Virgin Mary, standing above the candles, her face serene and timeless. Elena stood before it for a long time, not knowing what to say. She didn't feel holy or worthy. She felt small, like a child asking for something impossible. "Mother Mary," she whispered at last, "I don't even know what to ask anymore. Just, please take care of my children. Don't let me lose them." She lit a small candle, though it was her last dollar's worth of spare change. As the flame rose, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a thin streak of melted wax running down the statue's cheek, perfectly shaped like a tear. She blinked, stepped closer. The wax had come from a candle several inches away. Still it looked so human, so precise, it made her chest tighten. A priest approached quietly from behind. He was in his 60s, gentle-eyed. "You look like someone who's carrying a great weight," he said. Elena turned, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Father. I didn't mean to—" He raised a hand softly. No apology needed. Mary listens to those who come in silence, sometimes more than to those who speak. For a brief moment, she wanted to tell him everything, her fear, her debts, her feeling of failure, but instead she only nodded. The priest blessed her and stepped away. Eleanor remained kneeling. Her eyes were fixed on the small tear of wax that had hardened on the Virgin's face. It wasn't moving anymore, but the message felt alive. You are not forgotten. As she left the church, she felt an odd stillness in the air, like the world had paused for her. A flock of pigeons rose suddenly from the steps, and sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. At that same moment across town, a man was closing his briefcase in a downtown hotel room. He was a civil engineer from Montreal in Ottawa for one day only. In his jacket pocket was an envelope marked with a single name, Elena Martinez. His name was Daniel Whitaker, 50 years old, a structural engineer from Montreal in Ottawa for a short inspection project involving bridge repairs along the Rideau River. Married once, no children, a man of few words. He wasn't Catholic, not even religious, but for months he'd been haunted by a vivid dream, a woman kneeling before a statue of the Virgin Mary, whispering a prayer he could never quite hear. The dream would end the same way. The woman turns toward him, tears in her eyes, and says only one word, help. That Sunday morning, after finishing his coffee at the hotel lobby, Daniel walked out into the snow. He didn't know why, but his steps carried him toward Bronson Avenue and then to St. Patrick's Church, a place he'd never entered before. Inside, the warmth and silence struck him. He wasn't even sure what he was looking for. Yet when his eyes adjusted, he saw her. A woman, maybe mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, standing before the Virgin statue. Her coat looked too thin for winter, and in her posture there was something he recognized, a kind of weary dignity. Daniel froze. It was her, the woman from his dream. He didn't approach her. He couldn't. He stood near the back pew until she left, watching as she paused at the church door to make the sign of the cross with trembling fingers. When he finally stepped closer to the statue, he noticed the hardened drop of wax on the Virgin's cheek. It shimmered faintly in the candlelight, like a tear. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt an overwhelming urge to do something, anything, for that woman. Back at his hotel, Daniel sat at the desk, took an envelope, and wrote in careful script, "To the woman who prayed at St. Patrick's Church this morning. You don't know me, but I was led to you. Whatever burden you carry, please know, heaven sees you." He placed $1,000 in cash inside, the exact amount he had planned to spend on a new tablet for himself, and sealed it. The next morning he returned to the church, waiting quietly near the candles. When Elena arrived, eyes still swollen from tears, she didn't see him. He slipped the envelope between the pages of a prayer book she often used, whispered a silent thank you toward the statue, and left. By evening, when Elena opened that book to pray again, the envelope slid out. She stared at it, trembling, as if afraid it might disappear. Her name was written on the front, in neat handwriting, exactly as she spelled it. At first, Elena thought it was a mistake. Someone must have left the envelope for another person, some parish donation, perhaps. But when she turned it over and saw her name written in perfect cursive, she froze. Elena Martinez, not Miss, not Mrs., just her name, as though written by someone who knew her intimately. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a small note and a thick stack of Canadian bills, 10 crisp $100 notes, and a simple message, "Heaven sees you." Her first reaction wasn't joy. It was fear. She looked around the empty church, half expecting someone to step forward and claim it was a joke. No one did. Only the flicker of candles and the still gaze of the Virgin Mary remained. Elena sat down on the pew, her heart pounding. Tears filled her eyes, but confusion quickly followed. Who would do this? Was someone watching her? For a moment she even suspected a scam, some cruel trick designed to humiliate her. She tucked the envelope into her coat, hurried home, and locked the door behind her. That night she couldn't sleep. The words, "Heaven sees you," echoed in her head. She replayed the day at the church, the way the sunlight hit the statue, the quiet she felt, the tear-shaped wax on Mary's cheek. Could it really be an answer? But her rational mind resisted. Miracles happen to other people, she told herself, not to single mothers behind on rent. At 3 a.m., unable to bear the uncertainty, she called her mother in Bogota. The line crackled for a moment before her mother's familiar voice answered. "Mija, are you crying?" Elena hesitated, then whispered everything, the envelope, the note, the exact words written inside. There was a pause, and then her mother said quietly, "When you were a child, I asked Our Lady to take care of you wherever you went. Maybe she just reminded you that she still does." Elena pressed the phone to her chest and began to weep, not from fear this time, but from something deeper. When dawn came, she placed the envelope beside the small statue on her kitchen table. For the first time in years she knelt before it, not to ask for something, but to say thank you. She didn't know that across the city, Daniel was staring at his phone, looking at the same church's address again and again, unsure whether he had done enough or if he was supposed to meet her face to face. 3 days passed. Ottawa had slipped into that in-between season when winter hesitates to leave. Gray skies, melting snowbanks, the streets slick with slush. Elena carried the envelope everywhere she went. Tucked inside her purse like something sacred, she hadn't used the money yet. Each time she thought about it, her heart whispered, "This isn't mine to spend, not until I understand." That Wednesday afternoon, she took Sophia to a community clinic for her cough. The waiting room was small, lined with plastic chairs and the smell of disinfectant. Sophia was coloring on a magazine while Elena filled out forms. The door opened and a tall man in a charcoal coat stepped in, shaking snow from his hair. He looked vaguely familiar. She had seen him somewhere, though she couldn't place it. He spoke with the receptionist, then turned toward the seats. Their eyes met for less than a second, but in that instant, Elena felt something shift, a strange recognition she couldn't explain. Daniel nodded politely and sat 2 chairs away. He didn't realize it was her, not at first. The woman in the dream, the one from the church, now wearing a pale scarf and holding a child's hand. The silence between them felt charged. Sophia looked up and smiled shyly at him. "You look like my art teacher," she said without hesitation. Daniel chuckled softly. "Is that a good thing?" The girl nodded. "She gives me stickers when I draw the lady in white." Elena's breath caught. The lady in white? She asked. Sophia shrugged. The one who watches us. For a moment, Daniel's heart stopped. Those words, the lady in white, were the same ones from his recurring dream. He turned slowly toward Elena, and their eyes locked again. Neither spoke, but something unspoken passed between them, an understanding beyond logic. A nurse called Elena's name, breaking the spell. She stood, thanked him quietly for keeping Sophia company, and disappeared behind the clinic door. Daniel sat frozen. When he finally looked down, he noticed something under the chair she had just left. A small folded church bulletin from St. Patrick's Parish. He picked it up. On the back, someone had written a single sentence in neat handwriting. "Thank you, whoever you are." He smiled. For the first time in years, he whispered a prayer, not of words, but of gratitude. Neither of them knew that their paths were about to cross again, in a way that would leave no doubt that heaven had arranged every step. Over the next 2 weeks, life seemed to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways, the kind that people call coincidence, until they happen too often. Elena found a cleaning job at a downtown office, just a short walk from St. Patrick's Church. The position had opened unexpectedly, the manager told her. "Someone quit this morning. You came at the right moment." Her first paycheck covered her overdue rent exactly to the cent. Meanwhile, Daniel's bridge project was delayed, forcing him to stay in Ottawa longer than planned. He didn't mind. In fact, he found himself walking the same route each morning past the church, pausing at the steps for a quiet moment before work. He didn't light candles or cross himself. He simply stood there, as if drawn by something unseen. One evening, Elena finished her shift late and stepped out into a drizzle. The city lights shimmered across puddles, and she took refuge inside a small coffee shop to warm her hands. When she looked up, her breath caught. Daniel was there, sitting by the window, reading the Ottawa Citizen, half-empty mug in front of him. She hesitated. He looked up, and their eyes met once again. This time, both smiled. "You again," she said, her voice nervous but warm. "Seems Ottawa's not as big as it looks," he replied. They talked, first about the weather, then about their work, then about nothing and everything. Daniel never mentioned the envelope, and Elena never suspected. It was as though Providence itself wanted silence between them so the miracle could unfold naturally. When they left, the rain had stopped. Daniel offered her his umbrella. She refused at first, then accepted with a shy thank you. As she walked home, the umbrella tilted slightly, revealing its inner fabric, a faint printed image of the Virgin Mary, worn and faded with time. Elena stopped under a streetlight. Her pulse quickened. "Did he know?" she whispered. She turned to look back down the block, but Daniel was already gone. Only the faint sound of bells from St. Patrick's echoed through the damp night. That week she found a note slipped under her apartment door. "Faith is not about proof. It's about trust. D." There was no explanation, no number, no address, only the letter D and the quiet certainty that she was being guided, not by luck, but by love that moved through unseen hands. It was a cold April morning when the impossible happened. The city was just waking up, streets wet from overnight rain, buses sighing through intersections, the first cherry blossoms fighting their way through frost. Elena had just finished her early cleaning shift downtown. As she left the building, her phone rang. It was Mrs. O'Reilly, her elderly neighbor. Her voice was trembling. "Elena, dear, it's Sophia. She collapsed at school. They're taking her to the hospital." Everything blurred after that. The cab ride, the flashing lights, the smell of antiseptic, all melted into one long panic. By the time she reached Keogh Children's Hospital, Sophia was lying unconscious under fluorescent lights, doctors surrounding her tiny frame. "She has a severe infection," a nurse said quickly. "We're doing everything we can, but her body's not responding." Elena pressed her hands to her face, whispering broken prayers. Her knees hit the cold tile floor beside the bed. "Please, don't take her from me." Hours passed. Nothing changed. By evening, the doctor shook his head gently. "We'll keep her under observation, but it's critical now." In that sterile, mechanical silence, Elena felt her heart collapse. She reached into her purse and pulled out the small statue of the Virgin Mary, the one her mother had given her years ago. Placing it beside Sophia's pillow, she whispered, "Mother Mary, you saw me before anyone else. Please see her now." Then from the hallway came a familiar voice. "Elena?" It was Daniel. He stood at the doorway, eyes wide, holding a bouquet of white lilies. "I saw your neighbor outside the church," he said quietly. "She told me what happened." Elena didn't ask how or why, only nodded, tears streaming. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let's pray," he said simply. And together, for the first time, they did. Their voices trembled, uncertain, but in that uncertainty came something pure, two broken lives joining in surrender. When they finished, a sudden soft chime echoed through the monitor. The nurse rushed in, checking the readings. "Her temperature's rising, heart rate stabilizing," she murmured. Elena stared, unable to speak. Sophia's eyelids fluttered. Slowly she turned her head toward her mother and whispered, "Mama, the lady in white told me it's not my time yet." The room went silent. Daniel looked at the statue on the nightstand. The candle Elena had brought was flickering, and on the Virgin's cheek, again, a single drop of melted wax rolled down like a tear. By morning, Sophia was sitting up, weak but smiling. The doctors called it an inexplicable recovery. Elena called it something else. Grace. Outside the hospital, Daniel stood by the parking lot, looking up at the gray sky breaking into gold. He didn't see visions or hear voices, but in his heart he knew the truth. He hadn't just delivered an envelope weeks ago. He had delivered a prayer that heaven wanted answered. The morning after Sophia's recovery, sunlight filled the hospital room like a benediction. The air felt softer, lighter, as if the whole place had been washed clean. Elena sat by her daughter's bed, brushing her hair gently while nurses came and went, murmuring in disbelief at her sudden improvement. When the doctor returned with new lab results, he shook his head with a half-smile. "I don't know what happened," he admitted. "Her blood levels normalized overnight. It's like the infection vanished completely." Elena didn't try to explain. She only whispered, "Thank you." Then she turned to the small statue on the nightstand, its chipped hand glinting in the morning light. Later that day, Daniel returned quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He didn't say much, just sat near the window, while Elena helped Sophia draw a picture of the lady in white. In the drawing, the Virgin stood between them, her hands outstretched, sunlight radiating behind her. "Do you think miracles really happen?" Daniel asked softly. Elena smiled, her eyes glistening. "I used to think miracles were when something impossible happens, but now I think they're what happen when God reminds us we're not alone." He nodded slowly. For a long time, neither spoke. The world outside the window moved quietly, snow melting on the rooftops, people crossing the street unaware of the sacred moment happening above them. Before leaving, Daniel handed her a folded envelope, this time empty. "I don't have money to give," he said gently. "Just this, to remind you that sometimes faith fills what our hands can't." Elena took it, smiled, and tucked it beside the statue. She never asked how he had known her name or why he came that day. She no longer needed answers. That evening, as the sun set behind the hospital, she walked to the chapel and lit a candle. Its flame reflected on the statue's glass case, a single bright tear of light. She whispered, "Thank you, Mother, for not only saving her, but saving me." Outside, the city moved on, unaware that inside a small hospital room in Ottawa, A mother's heart had been reborn. Weeks passed. Spring came early that year, the kind of spring Ottawa hadn't seen in a decade. The air smelled of thawing earth and lilacs. Birds returned to the trees along Bronson Avenue, and every morning sunlight poured through the same church windows where it had all begun. Elena's life began to change in ways both visible and unseen. Her new job at the downtown office became permanent. The manager, who'd once said it was temporary, called her in one morning and handed her a contract. "You're the most reliable person we've had in years," he said. Her finances slowly stabilized. The landlord, moved by her honesty, offered to lower her rent for 6 months, just to help her get back on her feet. And at night, when she tucked her children into bed, the fear that had once lived in her chest was gone. In its place was peace. Every Sunday, Elena returned to St. Patrick's Church, not always to ask, sometimes just to listen. She kept the same small statue on her kitchen table, beside a fresh flower she replaced each week. Sophia's health had fully returned. The little girl insisted on saying a thank you prayer before every meal, sometimes whispering secrets to the lady in white when no one was watching. Liam, her older son, began drawing again, not superheroes or soldiers like before, but family portraits, always with a soft blue light in the background. One evening, as they walked home from church, Daniel met them outside the gates. He had extended his stay in Ottawa indefinitely, now consulting on a long-term project nearby. They didn't speak of the past, only smiled, as if both knew some stories no longer needed words. "Do you still have faith?" he asked quietly as they reached her corner. Elena looked up at the fading sky where clouds parted in gold. "I think faith had me all along," she said. They stood there for a moment, a mother, her children, and the man whose life had been changed by a dream, all under the quiet gaze of a church that had witnessed something extraordinary. In a city of millions, no one else noticed. But heaven did. Months later, when the summer sun returned to Ottawa, St. Patrick's Church stood just as it always had, quiet, ordinary, holy. Each evening the candles burned beneath the statue of the Virgin Mary, their light flickering like a heartbeat against the marble walls. Among them, one candle always glowed a little brighter, the one lit every Sunday by a woman and her 2 children. Elena never told anyone the full story, not the envelope, not the letter, not even the moment her daughter woke from the edge of death. She believed some miracles were meant to be carried in silence, not shouted from rooftops. But those who met her said there was something different about her eyes, a peace that could only come from someone who had seen heaven's tenderness up close. Sometimes she would meet Daniel after Mass, and they'd share coffee on the church steps, watching pigeons scatter into the blue. No promises, no explanations, just gratitude. Both of them knew that grace had passed through their lives, leaving behind a trail of quiet wonder. And if you asked Elena what she learned through it all, she would smile and say, "Miracles don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper through a stranger's kindness, a child's prayer, or a tear on a statue's cheek." Then she'd look toward the Virgin's gentle face and add softly, "All she ever asks is that we trust." The screen fades to black as soft choral music rises. In every corner of the world, hearts still whisper the same prayer, that we are seen, loved, and never forgotten, and sometimes heaven answers through the most unexpected messengers. Have you ever witnessed something you couldn't explain? Share your story below. And don't forget to subscribe to Ave Miracles, where faith meets the everyday.